and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Latika Burke. The ACTU and federal government have spent today defending the union movement after an explosive report into the Health Services Union's East Branch uncovered a culture of cronyism and nepotism. The report identifies millions of dollars paid to companies associated with the former General Secretary Michael Williamson. Joining me to discuss the so-called Temby report and much more is the Liberal MP Kelly O'Dwyer and Labor's Graham Perrett. Welcome to you both. But firstly, unions are already preparing for a Prime Minister Tony Abbott, and the revelations from the Temby report is certainly going to make their life much more difficult.
The Temby report did stop short of looking into all the relationships. That on its face does clearly call for further investigation, possibly an organisation with the powers of a Royal Commission.
Kelly O'Dwyer, to you firstly, would you like to see a Royal Commission into the Health Services Union's East Branch?
Well, certainly I think there are so many unanswered questions still. Despite the fact that the Temby report has been now released, there are many questions still unanswered. We have seen multi-million dollars now in what can only be described, despite the nice language that has been used, as fraud and theft. And we know that this runs very deep, not only with the HSU, but there are still questions now about other organisations, who's been paid what relationships they have with different union members, and what the links are with the Labor Party. Because let's not forget that Mike Williamson, who is the focus of much of this report, was president of the Labor Party only very recently and served on its most senior committee. So the Prime Minister needs to come out, she needs to distance herself, she needs to declare that this is simply not good enough, and she needs to say that all of the other affiliated union bodies are not in the same sort of position. She needs to assure herself of that, and there needs to be a proper, thorough investigation.
And is that a Royal Commission? And if Labor doesn't move to set one up and you're elected next year, would you like to see one set up?
Well, certainly, as Shadow Minister Abetz has actually said, it needs to have proper powers to properly investigate this, and I'm sure that if we were in the position to do so, that we would properly and thoroughly investigate it and give whatever powers are required to any investigative body that is set up in order to assure ourselves that there isn't this deep corruption and fraud deep within different unions.
Graham Perrett, to you in Brisbane, do you think your government should set up a Royal Commission before the Liberals get the chance?
Well, look, I will say this. I do agree with Kelly that any misuse of members' money is something that should be taken very seriously, and I'm assured by the Prime Minister that she with her strong union links recognises how abhorrent it is for members' money to be misused, and that I should stress. I've got much stronger connections with the union movement than Kelly. The scrutiny that goes on in most unions, the scrutiny that goes on by the rank and file of those that they elect to represent them, would normally not let anything like this take place. You normally have auditors, you normally have checks and balances so that this sort of alleged nepotism and the like would not occur. So, look, in terms of having a close look at this, I'm understanding from Minister Shorten, who also comes from a strong union background, and about making sure that every union member's dollars is used wisely, that we do, under the Fair Work Act, have the capacity to look closer at unions and the peak bodies and make sure that they're spending every dollar wisely. I don't have a problem with that at all.
Graham, do you accept... Sorry, Kelly, go.
What I was going to say, though, is at this point in time, though, neither Minister Shorten nor the Prime Minister nor even Graham himself can actually guarantee that this is not taking place. And the reason for that is that the penalties that currently apply to registered organisations, such as unions, they're not the same penalties that apply to companies if in fact fraud is going on, if proper accounting standards
Kelly
aren't
O'Dwyer,
used.
do you think in that case that there is an argument for bringing unions under an ASIC-style governance system?
Well, I certainly think we should have the same rules for companies and the same rules for union bosses and for the union leadership. I certainly think that we should have exactly the same rules, because there should be absolutely no question that members' money is misused. And I don't see how anybody could absolutely make any argument as to why it is that members should not be offered the same protections as shareholders.
Graham Perrott, Labor and the unions are bedfellows. Does this tarnish your government in the end?
Well, it certainly puts a strong odour there that unfortunately people might judge the actions of a misguided or criminal few and then judge everyone. Now, the reality is there'll always be the occasional bad boss, and there'll always be the occasional person that joins the Labor movement for the wrong reasons rather than the right reasons. Now, when I look around my caucus, I see people who joined up to look after workers and do the right thing by the nation. This is obviously there's some major problems in the HSU East. I understand we don't have a similar union in Queensland, so I'm not as familiar with it as Kelly might be. But certainly scrutiny of every member's dollars being used for the right reasons is not something I'm scared of, nor would any member of the Labor caucus.
The Tempe report only looks into the actions of Michael Williamson, the General Secretary. Now, that was set up through a union resolution. Do you think there's any case to extend any further investigations into perhaps the actions of other members of that union, including Cathy Jackson, the whistleblower at the centre of this?
Sorry, is that to me,
That's
Latika?
to you, Graham.
Yeah, sorry, Latika, I've got to admit, I haven't read the report. In fact, I sort of owe a debt to you in terms of your summary on Twitter, which is hardly a extensive reading of the report. So, but certainly in the little that I've seen, in the media, if there is the wrong culture in any organisation, the wrong culture without the checks and balances of independent bodies or independent auditors or the rank and file, there's always the possibility for corruption to occur, in whether it be the bowls club, a company or a union. That's the reality of human nature. Greed does motivate some people to do the wrong thing. So, look, in terms of having extra scrutiny, I don't have a problem with it. Whether you should judge all unions. There are some quite small unions. I think we've got the bacon manufacturers union, which is down to quite small numbers. Whether they need to be treated the same as Rio Tinto, I'm not quite sure. And whether you're going to treat all unincorporated associations the same, I'd hate for my little local bowls club to be treated the same as a BHP or a Rio Tinto. Sure. When it comes to penalties if they get some bookkeeping wrong. That would be a disaster.
Well, funnily enough, actually, at the moment, they're actually treated more harshly than a lot of these union bosses who are in charge of unions with significant funds at risk, because of course they're directors of a lot of these not-for-profits that do hold some funds on behalf of their members, and they're subject to the same directors' duties. So of course the penalties that apply to them are actually much more significant than the current penalties that apply to union bosses who, quite frankly, let's face it, engage in some of this fraudulent and quite corrupt activity.
Well,
and my view is
unincorporated associations, Kelly.
My view is that we need to be very transparent here, and I'm really pleased to hear you say, Graham, that you want to see full transparency, which is why I think the Prime Minister needs to guarantee that there is no corruption within these affiliated bodies to the ALP. Effectively the funding body for the ALP.
Yeah, Kelly, that would be like Tony Abbott guaranteeing that there are no directors in any company that gave donations to the Liberal or National parties. I mean, you've got to be fair dinkum here. You can take some leadership, but just, you've got to background in corporations.
Okay, all right.
You've got to understand silos of responsibility.
We might have to move along there, guys. Well, the HSU is one of the problems plaguing the Gillard government. A fresh survey out shows Labor's primary reducing 3 points to 28%, but Prime Minister Gillard's unmoved by that rating.
Government is about governing. It's about getting the big things done, the hard things done, that set our nation up for the future, that make sure we're stronger and fairer in that future. The big reforms don't come easy, but our Labor history teaches us that if you want to make those big reforms, you've got to stick to your guns on those big reforms, and you can't afford to be obsessed by the opinion polls.
Now, that may well be, but Graham Perrett, your other colleague, the Senator Mark Bishop, he said today that this approval rating should be a clarion call for the caucus, and that if you don't make some dramatic changes, you're facing a decade in the political wilderness. What dramatic change do you need to make?
Well, the first thing I'd point out is that I don't take my guidance from Western Australian senators. I take my guidance from the appropriately elected leader of the caucus, and that is Julia Gillard. That was the ballot results, as I recall, from earlier in the year. And I will say this, those polls showed some scary figures, that's right, for the Labor Party, and I'm certainly always a little bit sunnier when they're heading north. But that it showed that there were 15%, 3 in 20 Australians who don't care for the Liberal Party or the Labor Party. And certainly the clarion call for me is to go and find those 3 in 20 Australians that have disengaged from the political parties, the mainstream political parties, and tell them about the great things that the Labor Party has delivered and will deliver for them. And also, I guess part of that job is to notify them of the horror that, should Tony Abbott become Prime Minister, the sort of the abattorium that he would create and how horrible it would be for people. I've seen it in Queensland with Campbell Newman's, cuts left, right and centre to arts, to culture, to jobs.
Kelly O'Dwyer,
it scares me to think that would come in Australia.
Kelly, it is astonishing that Labor's primary can be so low, and yet dissatisfaction with Tony Abbott just keeps climbing. Why isn't he seen in a favourable light in the community?
Well, I think you're right to say, Latika, that there are historic low figures for the Labor Party, and the Prime Minister and Graham and the entire Labor Party would be incredibly concerned by this. Basically, having figures in the 20s would be particularly concerning for Julia Gillard because she's on a political death watch right now. I think there is no doubt whatsoever that we are going to see a change in the Labor leadership. There is a momentum that has been building.
Kelly, what about your own leader? What about your own leader? Why doesn't he cut through in a positive light to the community?
Well, I think Tony Abbott does cut through in a positive light to the community. In fact, Tony Abbott has
why is his
Tony
dissatisfaction so high when Labor's primary vote is so low then?
Well, Tony Abbott has a job to do as opposition leader. He needs to hold the Prime Minister and the government to account. Now, given the incredible, incredible mess that this government has made of actually governing, unfortunately, that has been a very big task. The government lied on the carbon tax.
Rates.
The government, well, if you give me a chance to respond, the government lied on the carbon tax, and Tony Abbott has been right in pointing out that Julia Gillard made a commitment before the last election. She then reneged on that commitment, and now we are facing the world's largest carbon tax that will go up and up and affect every single individual in Australia, Australian businesses, Australian not-for-profits, and that will have a significant impact on our Australian way of life. Now, it's not always popular to talk about these sorts of difficult issues, but Tony Abbott has made sure that he has been out every day talking to Australians right throughout this country to ensure that he is holding the Prime Minister and her government to account for the promises that they made.
Okay, well, time has run out, so we'll have to leave it there. Kelly O'Dwyer in Melbourne and Graham Perrett in Brisbane, thank you very much for joining us on Capitol Hill.
Thanks, Latika. Thanks, Kelly.
And you can join us again on Capitol Hill at the same time tomorrow.